If you are listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, it would be greatly appreciated if you could give the podcast a 5-star rating. This helps other listeners just like you discover the show. Thank you. This is Beyond BJU, Exposing Fundamentalism. I'm your host, Andrew Pludger, and I'm a survivor of Bob Jones University. BJU is a fundamentalist college with its roots in white supremacy and is known for its culture of indoctrination, conformity, and control. Its influence extends beyond its campus, impacting Christian schooling, politics, biblical counseling, and evangelical Christianity. The school serves as a hub for churches, schools, and camps, and these institutions perpetrate its abusive teachings and practices. This show explores these areas of influence and amplifies the stories of those who have been impacted by Bob Jones University. This is Beyond BJU, Exposing Fundamentalism. Hello, everyone. I am so happy to have Rachel Bernstein on the show today to really talk about a topic that has been on my mind a lot. And it's a topic, or really the question of, is education really indoctrination? Because we've seen a lot in the news, people saying that education is just indoctrination. And even as I've been calling out Bob Jones University, people will dismiss it by saying, oh, well, all education is indoctrination, so what you're saying doesn't really matter. So really excited to dig into that. But Rachel, for people who are not familiar with you, could you do a quick introduction?
I am a therapist and an educator and a cult specialist, and work with people who've been involved in cults, work with families who have loved ones in situations of control, work with people who have been in relationships with controllers, with malignant narcissists, and am the host of the podcast Indoctrination that Andrew knows well. And thank you for being on the staff of that. And I'm a mom and busy doing my thing. And starting to put together a book. We'll see where that takes us. But that's very cool. And so I love being able to talk to you because it is really interesting to hear your perspective, but I also like being able to answer your questions. Your questions are always very thoughtful and timely. So I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Thank you, me too. And I love being on staff. It's just been incredible. I've been thinking about that lately, all the knowledge that I've accumulated on cults just from like listening to the podcast while I'm editing videos. It's just the wealth of free knowledge that you give for people, like it's life-saving and it's changing lives. So it's just incredible. And I think a lot of listeners, oh, of course, and a lot of listeners who listen to this podcast, I've heard them, they've messaged me, they're like, oh, I love the Indoctrination podcast. I'm glad I found it. It's amazing. So it's been great to kind of see that. But yeah, I'm really, really excited to get into today's topic. And, it's interesting. I think it's very important to get into definitions so we know what we're talking about. And how words can be thrown around and twisted and redefined in context to get a reaction in people. So indoctrination is a word that has been used a lot. But before we get into that, I'm really curious. So what is the definition of education?
So education, I think, means exposure to information. And it means giving people an opportunity to acquire some new intel, the latest kind of information about something. And it also, and I think probably not enough, but it should entail more than it does, the process of teaching people how to learn, how to acquire, how to research, how to hold on to information, and also how to link information with other information, see how things build on each other. Like when you're taking, let's say, a history class, what you hope is that it will teach you about a part of history, but also help you understand how we got there. What were the things that led to that, and what has happened since then? So there's this sense of connection to kind of the continuity of it, the chronology of it, sort of seeing big picture. And so it's teaching people information, but also how to learn information and why information is important.
And what is the definition of indoctrination?
So, when you're dealing with indoctrination, you're dealing, instead of educating people, because it's quite the opposite, you are dealing with the process of teaching people to believe what you want them to believe uncritically. So, there isn't the questioning. The educational process, I picture a group full of like a classroom filled with students with their hands raised. When you're doing indoctrination, no hands are raised. It doesn't matter what you understand of that, and it doesn't matter what question you want to ask. You just wait to be given more information that you need to absorb, that you need to know, and that you can't question, and that you also can't disagree with. So it really is just the absorption of information that a person or a group or country or whoever's doing the indoctrinating wants you to know. And that if you don't agree with it, there's something wrong with you, or it's somehow punishable. And there's also a right and a wrong. So there's a right way to believe, and all the other ways are wrong. That's also different from education, where there are many sources of information and many ways to look at the same thing.
Yeah, that is fantastic. Thank you for covering that, because what I've been really seeing a lot in the news and with people online, when there's accusations of indoctrination in education, or it's happening in a book club or a drag queen story hour or stuff like this, it's usually, for me, when I hear someone say that, I hear someone's getting access to information that I don't want them to get access to, or this information shouldn't be anywhere. Like it's dangerous. And if you expose people to this kind of information, you're indoctrinating them. Whereas, with education, it's about being exposed to all kinds of perspectives and critically analyzing that information and questioning, like you said. But for me, when I hear people saying, oh, this information is bad, exposing it to our children is indoctrination, I think it's definitely meant to scare people, to heighten their senses, and kind of, if someone is indoctrinating someone, you're going to be scared of that person and you're going to want to end that immediately. Um, but, oh yeah, something else I want to say. I have Google alerts set up for the indoctrination podcast. So if it's mentioned in the news anywhere, and Google alerts, I get a ton of right wing news sources that use the term indoctrination all the time. I never get it from left wing news stuff, rarely at least. And so that's just something else I wanted to throw in there. But what is your opinion um, on when people throw around the word indoctrination? Because I think we should be able to question that. Okay, like if indoctrination is happening, then let's dig into that. But I think it's just a word that can be thrown around, and any word can be weaponized, as you know, and as I've learned a lot from your show. But what are your thoughts on the weaponization of the word indoctrination?
Right. So I think when people use the word indoctrination, as opposed to education or exposure to information, what they're saying basically is, I'm scared. That's how I hear it. I'm scared that people are going to learn another way to look at something. which will mean that then we can't control them. And we can't handle that notion that once people get exposed to other ways of looking at things, they might choose to look at it that way too, or they might choose to not see it the way we need for them to see it. And so we're going to use a tactic that is one of the most successful behavior modification tactics, which is to infuse fear in people, that then they are being indoctrinated by being exposed to other things like more liberal ideas, where that might mean that then they're going to go do things that we can't control and we can't scare them out of. And they might find that it's okay to be gay, and we don't want that. And they might find that if they learn from someone, let's say, who is trans, who does something that they respect, might be doing an environmental initiative that really is going to change people's lives and the safety of the planet, but they're also trans, that's going to scare us because they might think that trans people can be respected. And then they might think it's okay. So we have to make sure they're not exposed to these people who are going to interfere with the things that we have prescribed as right and the things that we have prescribed as wrong. I think when people also want you to not notice what they're doing, they do this technique of they sort of boomerang it, right? So then we're not trying to indoctrinate you. The people out there who are exposing you to a whole variety of other kinds of teachers and other kinds of ideas are indoctrinating you. That's where you're going to be in danger, and we're going to keep you safe from that danger. It's like people who will say, well, all religions are a cult, so fine, you can call us a cult, but all religions are a cult, which is not true. And so when you notice that a group of people is saying all people from a particular political party are trying to indoctrinate you, then I think what they're doing is they're sort of trying to call off the dogs, right? Like, no, look over there. And so any of those kinds of blanket statements are things to really look at with suspicion.
Wow. Incredible answer. Like, I was just nodding. I'm like, yes, like this is all so accurate and so relevant to really what is happening in our educational spaces, our libraries, our schools, and our political landscape in our country. And I think, with the weaponization of words, once someone is accused of something that triggers that fear in us, like that logical part of our brain is shut down. And I think I've also been thinking of like just with the right bringing back the accusation of grooming of the LGBTQ community. Like, no one wants to be for groomers. So a lot of people sadly don't question that, like that they're actually weaponizing words to, again, like you said, instill that fear and to attack people and different things. But something I am really curious about. So, education is being exposed to different kinds of information, and questioning that indoctrination is like the opposite, one very limited perspective, and you're not able to question that. So, when does education then start to get into indoctrination?
If I can make columns, I would see education as respectful and indoctrination as disrespectful. I would see education as open and indoctrination as deceptive because there's an agenda. And so when you have, let's say, a teacher who comes in, who is teaching the class, but is only going to teach kind of one side of it and not show you another side, or not allow you to be able to see the other side, or find articles that show an opposing view, that's when it's starting to slip into indoctrination. Because the educational process should be as kind of a Socratic method. It should be that you're open to questioning, open to learning, and again, open to other sources of information and other viewpoints. And so if someone says, I want you to learn this because this is the right way to look at it if someone's using that kind of language, or this is the only way that you should be thinking, or this is the kind of way that's going to keep you safe in this world if you believe it this way. That kind of language is already opening the door to indoctrination. And if you notice pushback, or if you notice anger in response to you saying, but what about this? Or what about this person? Or I found this article, and they say, no, 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 I'm not going to let you incorporate an article from that magazine because that magazine is something. That magazine is conservative, or that magazine is liberal. And if you just cannot use it as any kind of platform for absorption of alter information, of different kind of information, then you have someone who's in charge who, again, has an agenda, who wants to have you open your eyes to one side and keep blinders on the other. And I mean, it did happen. I think one time I had a teacher years ago who gave me a bad grade on something because I did, instead of making the point that I think he wanted me to make, I made the point, and instead of putting a period at the end of it, I put a comma, and I said, and also, and I gave this other viewpoint because that's how my mind works. And at that point where there was a comma, he then wrote, your paper would have been an A if you hadn't added this other part. This is nonsense. This is from someone who can't be trusted, blah, 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 because it was a different viewpoint. And so that's also where you get into indoctrination, where you feel you're being punished for being open to an opposing viewpoint.
As you were saying all of that, I just kept thinking back on my indoctrination at Bob Jones University, because I remember taking an apologetics class. I think it was my senior year, or no, it was my junior year. And one of the projects, or the main project of this class, was we had to do, I think it was like I want to say between 30 and 50 hours of reading. And we had to choose from this list of books that they picked out for us that had, of course, all this one viewpoint. And for me, at this point, I already mentally didn't believe that stuff at that all. And so I was like, I don't want to do all of this reading. And so in my mind, I'm like, okay, just do some reading, confirm, just tell them what they want to hear, and just put it together in the right format, write it out, just do it. Just tell them what they want to hear. And, let's just see what grade I get. And I got an A on the.
Right. Right. It's just so depressing, right?
Yeah.
Like, oh, I was right. You don't want to be right about that you need to just feed them back what they were hoping, you would say.
And I was frustrated too, because that was my last part of their, I guess you would say, the Bible core of their curriculum, because there was like 5 Bible classes, no matter what major you were, that you had to take. They were part of the indoctrination. But it was interesting as you were, because I was realizing, that's what they were doing, especially through that class, was indoctrinating us with one viewpoint to just spit out all these answers against different arguments against their version of Christianity. And I remember also a survivor from Bob Jones who studied biblical counseling telling me how they were in a class on mental health, and they would just rant and say all these things about why medication for mental health is bad. And it was all negative resources, but nothing positive. There were no exceptions for people to be on medication for mental health at all. And they challenged that. They went to them in person, their office, and they just gave them a bunch of bull crap answers and sent them on their way. And so again, like, that indoctrination, it is scary that people will teach that kind of stuff. I know as you, a mental health professional, you're shaking your head like, what? Like, oh my gosh, yeah, it's terrible.
It's so interesting because indoctrination, it's gonna find its way into many different environments. The environments that are gonna bother me the most really are educational system, and then also even within, counseling world, which I'll talk about in a sec. But I think one of the ways you can also figure out about indoctrination is if there's someone down the line who benefits from you believing a certain way. Like if it is that Bob Jones University gets its funding from people who benefit from having everyone believe the certain way and then want to recruit and bring in more people and bring in more money. It's like how I've talked about on the podcast. Like if you're reading a study before looking at the study and the conclusion of the study, you want to see who funded it. What does that organization have as its agenda, if it has one? What does it have to gain? Like if it is, I've used this example before, but if there's a study that comes out that says like tomatoes kill people, right? Okay, fine. And then you find out it's put out by like the mustard seed growers of America, right? Okay. So that's an easy one. But you want to really look at an organization and who funded something, and also sometimes who's funding the university and who are the major donors and the major givers, or the ones who are paying for the chair of that department. And if the people in that department feel they need to then please the donors, and that's the information you're going to get, and it's going to be very skewed. Same thing with some social service agencies and counseling centers. There are some, unfortunately, that will get more funding if they have more people who have certain diagnoses, or people know they can get more insurance coverage if they can give someone a more serious diagnosis. And so who's benefiting? You really want to look at that and see, because indoctrination can also happen when you tell someone they have a particular diagnosis and then you base something on that or give them medication for that. You can really convince them that it's true. It's like 12-step. Like, well, now that you're an alcoholic, you need to come every week. I'm sorry, when did we decide that I'm an alcoholic, right? But you decided that because that's what I need to be in order to be a good member of this organization.
Okay. Wow, that is a really good point. Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up because that's something I've been curious to about Bob Jones specifically is who is funding them. That is something that a lot of people, because right now the enrollment is really tanking for this school, and some people, and they're looking for a new president. They don't have an official president. It's just an interim president right now. So they're curious, how are they going to stay afloat? And it's just interesting to, I don't know if I can find that out or not, but that's something that's been on my mind. But yeah, and like I just think of, studies can be manipulated. And again, like you said, looking for who's funding it, and people can twist findings, leave out certain information, or conduct research in a certain way to have the outcome that they really want to have. And so really, I mean, the fight against indoctrination is we need to enable people to have critical thinking skills, to be able to recognize, I think, also propaganda, because I think learning that language and the science of that is really important. But something else I want to dig into also is the process of indoctrination. What does that exactly look like?
Right. So indoctrination is something where you want to instill a certain emotional impact in people, like fear. Like, for example, if you can make false equations, like people who don't follow the Bible in this way all go to hell. Okay. So that's right. That's an equation that's just given. And so then if you are fed something that's fear-based to begin with, and then you're going to have people who are going to be much more open to then dismissing that whole way of thinking that might now, according to that equation, take them astray and put them in danger. What's the point of even studying it if you know it's wrong and bad and is going to send you the opposite of where you'd like to go? So I think then if you can do that kind of absolute kind of presentation, this is right, this is wrong, this is safe, this is dangerous, and then also then using that fear to stoke that kind of worry that yeah, like if people don't follow the Bible, they're going to do something that's dangerous for them. Like if I tell people I'm agnostic, I may mention this to you, they will say, well, why don't you just wake up in the morning and go out and kill someone? Like that would be on my to-do list, if I'm agnostic. And so, well, because I don't want to, and what? And why is that an automatic thing? But you can tell they've been given this notion that unless you have God who you need to answer to, you're going to do horrible things and you can't be trusted and you can't trust yourself and you're going to do the worst things imaginable. Well, I don't, prescribe to that kind of thinking. And so I don't even understand the question, but for some people that has been their automatic response to me saying I'm agnostic. And so I just know that's indoctrination. That's this absolute idea. So it starts with the absolutes and the black and white kind of thinking. And then something that makes it really very powerful is to have there be testimonials. People then will talk about all the bad things that happen because they expose themselves to other ways of thinking or other kinds of lives to lead, and or because they left this, and this is the bad thing that happens to you if you leave this. So when you hear these testimonials, they can be very motivational and very fear-mongering, and they really do a number on people to keep them in line in that way of thinking. Like a pastor might say, if you don't believe me, listen to all these other people. And they try to get people who are kind of relatable or similar in age. And so then you think, oh, that pastor must be right. And so it gives you this confirmation bias. So confirmation bias is also part of indoctrination. Then there is the need to make people afraid of exposing themselves to opposite information, that something bad is going to happen to you if you even go on that website, if you even talk to that person who might give you another kind of viewpoint. And then there is the social dynamic, the social psychology. Well, everyone who is around me, who I like or who I respect, seems to believe this way and also knows that this other way of thinking is wrong. And so I'm going to try to get in line here so I'm not standing out. And maybe it can't be that everyone here is wrong. And so maybe that's going to help to, foster another way of looking at this that might be different than the way I'm thinking, because clearly the way I'm thinking is wrong. And then with indoctrination too, you have the worry, you have the what ifs. What if I don't believe the right way? What if I change my viewpoint? What if the things they say are going to happen to me that are bad? Maybe they're right. And so I have to now, even if I'm not even in that class anymore, and I haven't heard that teacher's voice in months, I'm now indoctrinating myself. I've learned how to do it to me because I'm too afraid, and I've been made too afraid of looking astray or thinking about it in a different way or going back to my original way of thinking, because I believe in the what ifs. What if they're right and something bad will happen to me? And so then people do this sort of self-gaslighting, self-indoctrination. So people who do indoctrination could just set the wheels in motion and have you be scared enough where you reinforce it for yourself. They don't even have to do the work anymore.
Wow. Okay. Like so much just going through my mind through all of that. So I'll just start with the testimonial part. Because when you're talking about the testimonials, I just thought about my upbringing in the independent fundamental Baptist movement. And exactly what you described, people would talk about how horrible their lives were before they found that group. Oh, they were drug addicts. Oh, they were alcoholics. They were hopeless. They were depressed. There's so much evil in the outside world, but then they found the group and everything was fine and they're safe and they have a much better life. Like it makes it so there's, like you said, that fear mongering, there's no other options. It keeps you in that. And again, that confirmation bias. So then you were talking about just how like the differing information is dangerous and made me think of like in religious cults, how, and really from my also experience in the IFB and then at Bob Jones, even exposing yourself to that information could cause you to doubt and turn away from God. And any information that was different from what was taught was of the devil, was of Satan. And even growing up in that, I remember being taught too that, oh, something might look good or it might look okay. But I'm trying to remember what they would say. They'd be like, that Satan would presents himself as an angel of light. It might seem nice, but it could still be of Satan. And so there was that fear around that. So growing up, never learned evolution, only that, oh, isn't it crazy that these atheists believe everything is an accident? How crazy is that? That's just what I would hear growing up. They believe everything is an accident. How dumb, how stupid they are. That's what I would hear a lot growing up.
Wow. It's incredible. Wow. To add to it, and I just thought of this just as you were saying, when you could learn all about the atheists and how they feel, that means that you were living in a very isolated way. You didn't have exposure to people who are atheists or agnostic, where you could say, hey, is it true that, and they could say, I'm sorry, what? But if you don't have that, if you are isolated, and again, the way to isolate people is to let them really look down on other people, that they don't have to, have a conversation or a relationship with other people who are less than, or to fear them, that these people can take them astray, so you need to stay away from them. But it really is something, I think, for people to be really wary of when they're told, you don't need to talk to these people you've decided something about. You don't need to find out if it's true. We've told you it's true. So that should be sufficient for you. And I think when you are kept from talking to an entire group of people within the population, you need to wonder why that is and what they're afraid of you finding out that is different than what they want you to believe.
Yes, yes. Well, and that's so true. And something I remember growing up was there was so much fear about going to a secular college, which I know it's strange for people to hear that, but that was the language. They would call it a secular college. And you would hear, or I would hear stories about all these people that would go to these secular colleges and they would turn away from God and go down a dark path. And so, it was a way for the pastor to get all these young people to decide to go to a fundamentalist college where they could hear the truth. He would say, you hear the truth. And so, and again, it makes you question, when you put on those critical thinking skills, oh, well, why are you isolating? Like, why do we have to isolate from it? And for me, as I got out, I'm like, okay, well, if you have the truth, why do we have to hide from and keep away from all this information? Shouldn't the truth stand scrutiny to all this? Shouldn't it hold up?
It's such a good question. That's such a good question. I mean, yes, it should. It should. But I think that there is this real worry that if you, let's say you go to a secular college, that means that everyone is going to want to leave what they are raised with. And that's not necessarily going to happen. It is going to happen in greater numbers if people are exposed to things that they really think they would enjoy, that they haven't seen or experienced yet. But it doesn't mean they're not going to come back to it at some point. I mean, I think that there's something really nice about being given the option, and people will find, even within religious organizations, that sometimes people come back to it because they missed it. But I think if you keep such a strong hold on people, it's going to make them really almost crave it and crave exposure to it in a way. It's like I was raised. I was raised in a household. This has nothing to do with religion. It has to do with polyunsaturated fats. My mom was really afraid of really unhealthy food. So of course I loved going to friends' houses who had donuts. It was like, I like your personality, blah, 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 but you have this pantry that's to die for. So um so I thought, okay, well, that's not good, because I would start to really be dreaming, about whatever ice cream. So that's not good. But I decided when I had kids to have what they called the junk pantry, which was like marshmallows and just crap, just horrible things. And my mom hated that it was there. Of course, she was the one who ate most of it, but in secret, I would hear like bags opening in the kitchen because she was starving too, because she had these everything in our house was beige growing up. It was like bran and whatever, nothing colorful. So then I wanted my kids after a while to not crave it. I wanted them to not dream about Twinkies. I wanted them to just be able to walk past the junk closet and go like, yeah, it's always going to be there. And there's going to be a cookie. There's going to be a marshmallow, but it kind of makes my stomach hurt. So I'm going to have an apple instead. And that's what happened. And I thought it was a crapshoot. Like, I didn't know if that was going to work, but I thought the opposite happened to me. So let me reverse it. And I wonder how much it would be for some of these places to say, this is what we think is best for you. This is what we want you to believe, but see what you think. And if you like it and if you miss it, come back. But having such a strong hold, I think, is really not, it's not going to help people, I think, feel like they're there of their own free will after a while. They're going to feel like it's the only option they were given.
Yeah, I think that's a great example because I remember knowing someone who, their parents, and they're like, yeah, we started letting our kids drink a little bit of wine at age 16 because we didn't want them to just go crazy when they did get a hold of that. We wanted that exposure. And I think you're spot on with like that, holding all of that back, having only that one experience, that then some people, when they do finally get to taste or experience different things, it can maybe go a little crazy. And it is frustrating because, in the cult I grew up in, when that did happen with people, it would always be like, look, we told you they would do this. We told you they would go down this dark path. Look, they're proof. And, people we use as sermon examples of when in reality, they did not develop that self-control. They did not have that experience. And even just, struggling with their identity, struggling with purpose, struggling with trauma. Now that I've realized it looking back, there's all these things that are going on in their lives that the cult doesn't want you to think about. It's just, no, they're bad, they're evil, they went down this path, and you're going to go. And, and I'm just saying that it doesn't mean that what they said was true either. Because Rachel, how they can exaggerate things in cults to scare people a lot. So
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. Right? Yeah. Oh, yeah. The worst thing is going to happen. It's never just like, yeah, God might be like, yeah, try better tomorrow. Right. That's not going to be the response. Or, I'm very disappointed in you, Rachel. But I still love you. What? No. Nope. So, right. There's going to be a lightning bolt right. And I wonder, I don't know if we have time today or maybe another time for us to talk about how you undo some of that indoctrination, but it really does affect you physiologically. Like, I've seen people in my office who will say something that they learned was sacrilegious, even if they're just saying, I don't know if I believe such and such. And then they will duck, like they're prepared to be hit by lightning, by something. And I'll notice over time if they duck less, or maybe every other time, like they're kind of undoing some of the indoctrination. But indoctrination gets under your skin. It's not just an idea, it affects your whole body.
oh yes, I think that's so accurate. And I think like for me, I think there are many things that maybe help me undo indoctrination. I think being different in an environment that wanted conformity, not being able to fit what they wanted and eventually questioning that. And I think having experiences that didn't match what they taught, that cognitive dissonance that you have to deal with, and it was just very slow for me. And then, and in their words, me being a little rebellious and exploring outside of that and understanding that, oh, the consequences I experienced wasn't really what they said. And it's something I'm still like exploring in therapy and understanding, but like it is like I remember cursing at God, waiting for him to strike me with lightning, just seeing what would happen.
Right?
I remember doing that, testing that.
Wow. Were you terrified?
I was terrified. And I
Oh,
think I was in an emotionally really awful place. It was like, just kill me. Like, I don't care.
oh wow. Oh, wow.
Yeah. So, and then of course nothing happened, but it was just, yeah. Yeah, it is crazy the indoctrination that happens in that environment.
So sad to think about that you ever were going to be in a place where you would say, I don't care. I mean, that is very, very sad, very desperate, kind of almost hopeless.
Yeah.
My goodness. Wow. Wow.
Sorry, I didn't mean to overshare, but that was just
No,
something that I
it's,
thought of.
I think people can relate to that because I think they're not necessarily going to take that chance of being killed on the spot or struck by lightning unless they're prepared to either live or die. Like either way, I'm ready for that. And just to get to that point says something about what you were put through.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Something else I think maybe we might have covered this a little bit, but like, why do people want to plant doubts and mistrust about maybe secular educational institutions or even just mainstream things or even like mainstream media? Why do they want to plant doubts and mistrust around that?
So I think, there's a lot that people can learn that is going to be appealing to them and enough where they're going to want more of it. They're going to be maybe resentful of having been kept from it. They're going to want to expose themselves to things that feel good and satisfying and are new and fresh because when you're raised in a certain environment with certain teachings, it can get stale. You know what the teaching is going to be, you know what the expectation is, and life doesn't feel as exciting. And you might not even know what is an exciting life can feel like until you read a book that just blows your mind or you see a show where you think, wow, like I can do that in life and I can go on a date also and I don't have to marry the person and just like what is possible out here and or I can be gay or I can be myself basically is what you're saying. It's not I can be gay, I can be me. And so I think that I think that what is interesting is also seeing relationships where there isn't abuse, where you can also use your voice. I mean, in media, in song, when you hear singers be able to say how they really feel about something in a way that you've never been able to express yourself, you've never been free to say what's true and what's on your mind. I remember working with a group of kids who came off a compound and they were staying with a family. And at night, the kids would sneak and watch TV. And it was just like Nickelodeon sitcoms, but they were blown away, first of all, by the dress, like that they didn't have to wear like prairie outfits or whatever, but that kids could say something to their parents, like, I don't like when you do such and such. And the first time I remember this kid came to me and said, I saw something I didn't know it was possible. And I said, what was that? And they said, in one of these shows that don't tell my mom I watched, the dad apologized to his son and it blew his mind. And so I think that whole idea of the hierarchy also being shifted is something that makes people very worried who want to have control over you, who want to make sure that you never get apologized to, that you're the one who always has to do the apologizing if anyone's going to do it, because then everything, for people who want control, that sends their world into this topsy-turvy place. And then they're not quite sure how they can maintain control if it isn't strictly adhered to in the way that they want you to believe it should be adhered to. The other reason, though, is that it's limitless. So as soon as you can get your hand on any book or any show, any video, any song, your exposure to the world is going to be exciting, but in a limitless way. And so it's just going to keep going, going, going. It's not like you're going to watch every YouTube video in 24 hours that exists and then be done. It keeps more is generated all the time. You have to learn how to sift through it. You have to learn what's healthy and what's not, which is something a lot of people coming out of these situations don't know. So they do have to learn that. But I think that a lot of these very repressive environments know what they're up against, and they're afraid of it. They're really afraid of it because then they really think they're going to lose control, and it's all about control for them.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because as you were saying that, I was just thinking about just with Donald Trump and a lot of his followers that are so fearful about their way of life not being dominant or dominating or in control of our society. And it is that fear of loss of control exactly what you were saying. And even with just a lot of issues with books and libraries across America. And it is interesting because I've had conversations with people because, with the issues with like LGBTQ books and different things. And then someone was saying, all right, if they're so worried about, okay, what they're saying is sexual content, then okay, let's get rid of all the books with all sexualities that have sexual content. Let's just not focus on one, then let's do it all across the board and be fair about it. But of course, they're not worried about that because, they're fine with these children seeing, like being exposed, I guess, older to those different narratives. And I've met Bob Jones survivors where they're like, oh my gosh, like I didn't, it took them a failed marriage to realize that they were queer. They weren't into that because they were only told one narrative. There was only one option, one way to be. There was no exploration. And so they've now come out of a failed marriage and there's so much pain from it. And they're like, if I would have had that option to explore that, there could have been so much less pain in my life instead of just one way to be, one way to think. They're like, and if I talk to survivors, they're like, yeah, I didn't know. Again, they didn't have that language to even know to explore that. So it is devastating, the effects of indoctrination. And something else I want to get into is really how do we spot and protect ourselves from indoctrination?
So again, if you're hearing language that is absolute, like this is the right way, every other way is wrong. This is a safe source of information. All the other people who have written books about this, they can't be trusted. If you're noticing this dichotomy that is so black and white, then know that that is indoctrination, period. Because just even statistically speaking, that can never be true. That only the people they know about and they think are okay are safe, and everyone else is not. Because even people at Bob Jones University have not met all authors in the world, and so there's no way for them to know that for sure. So look out for that kind of dichotomous thinking, black and white, and all good, all bad. And also, if you are noticing too that you're being made to feel scared, that it's not that someone says, listen, people who write books with this kind of agenda, they're just wasting people's time. I mean, I can feel that way about some of the pseudoscience influencers out there. Like, okay, that's a huge waste of time and waste of money. Yes. But if somebody is saying that person who you're interested in learning about is just someone who is going to waste your time, don't ever check out what they're doing. That's indoctrination, because while it might be a waste of your time, still being barred from being able to access it, being told you're doing something wrong, having to answer to someone and admit being called on the carpet. Did you look at that video? Did you read that book? That's indoctrination. That's using fear. That's using public shame to keep people also from accessing what they would like to. That's you basically saying, I'm afraid that another person's point of view might have merit to you. And I don't know if I can handle that. I don't think the university can handle that. So I'm going to make you feel embarrassed in public for having done that. That's also indoctrination. So you look for the kind of control. You look to see also if there's an agenda. What do they need for you to believe and why? And how do they benefit from it and not you?
Okay, wow, that's incredible. Because as you were saying that, I was thinking about just the rule book at Bob Jones, how there's so many rules around TV, music, movies, books. And I remember going to Bob Jones and I would have a lot of books, and some of them I'm like, you know what? I'm going to turn the book on the shelf, but I'm going to put the title towards the wall so they cannot see the title because I'm so afraid of getting in trouble for them seeing this book. Maybe this book doesn't check, which check means like approved in that environment. We use that word a lot, like music that was checkable, books that were checkable, movies that were checkable. But oh my gosh, so interesting. But I know you have to go. But yeah, thank you so much for doing this episode. And like I learned a lot from it. And I know so many other people will too. And they'll take this information and they can apply it in their own lives and protect themselves from indoctrination.
I hope so. I hope so. And I think it might even mean for some people to take a risk. And if they're not sure if what they're being exposed to is indoctrination, then test it out and tell a teacher, oh, I decided to get this book out of the library. See how they respond. And if you say, well, actually, they had some good ideas, see how they respond. If you ask a teacher, I would really like to know more about the sort of the opposing views or the other belief systems. And if they say, no, you don't need to, then know also that that's indoctrination. Because in a place of learning, when a student says, I want to learn more about X, a teacher should be delighted, not scared. And so if they're scared, it's because they've been made to be given an agenda for you. And they also have to answer to the people who have hired them. So everyone's sort of working to protect themselves and not really to protect you. Protecting you and treating you well, treating you respectfully means that they can say, like, it's like showing love to someone. Like if you love someone, set them free, right? Like let you as a student have wings where you can just fly around and expose yourself to different things and then see where you land. And if there's acceptance for wherever you landed, then it's education, not indoctrination.
Powerful, powerful. Oh my gosh. Well, thank you again for coming on the show.
My pleasure. It's always good to talk to you. It's always fun.
Oh, it's great talking to you too.